Thank you for joining us for the Ellsworth Miller Memorial Lecture Series established by Cap Leonard. The Board of Trustees offers sincere thanks to Cap for his continued support of the lecture series. Also worthy of thanks is the Chebeague Community Church for making their lovely space available to our organization. Last but not least, thanks to our tech crew, Richard Hackle, our technology lead, and the man who can't say no, because I said so, John Holt. Before commencing with the lecture, I wish to acknowledge and honor the Indigenous people who were first to inhabit Chebeague, forage its fields and forests, and fish its waters. You will find in the back of the church a donation jar if you wish to support the efforts of the Historical Society. Please save your questions relative to the lecture. They will be addressed following the lecture. Those zooming in are asked to type their lecture questions in the chat box and select "to everyone." Tonight's lecture, Chebeague Weather, Past, Present, and Future, will be delivered by Bill Danielson. For 30 years, Bill taught meteorology, climate, and astronomy at several institutions, retiring as Professor Emeritus from the University of Hartford. He is author of numerous articles and letters on weather-related topics, earth science textbooks, college meteorology texts, and a guide to Cape Breton weather. For a decade, he wrote a monthly newspaper column on Cape Breton's weather and hosted a monthly weather hour on CBC in Nova Scotia. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Bill Danielson. Thank you.
I don't think I can do that when I'm speaking. Thank you, Mary. That was way more introduction than I needed. And thank you, Cap, for having this lecture series in the first place. Thanks to Donna Damon for helping me and rounding up materials for this talk. Can everyone hear all right? Okay, good. So let me see how I start this. There we go. Just have to see what you're seeing. Now I feel comfortable about it. So I need to tell you this story that probably will ring a little familiar about a weather forecaster who passed away recently. He was a good forecaster, so he went to heaven. And St. Peter told him when he arrived, I know we ask every person who arrives in heaven to tell about the most important thing that happened in their life. And everyone will be there listening to this. And right away, the forecaster says, I know just what I'm going to talk about. There was this huge flood in Portland, Maine in 2018. The water rose 13.5 feet above sea level. It swamped everything down close to the waterfront and caused enormous amounts of damage. And Noah, I just blew it. St. Peter nodded and said, well, that's very interesting. Just remember that Noah will be in the audience. And I feel that way here tonight because all of you probably have seen more weather in Chebeague than I have, except for my wife and my daughter, I guess. And so, and you've seen it from different perspectives, from the point of view of people on the water, fishermen, fisherwomen, farmers, children, and so on. my perspective is as a meteorologist, and so I hope I'll be able to add some novelty to some of the things you already know about that I do not know about yet myself, and I would love to learn about.
Sorry to interrupt you, Bill. We have
Yep.
another, we have to share your screen. It didn't come through the last time. So let me just get you shared again.
Okay.
Share screen. How about that one? Okay. Now the world can join us.
Okay.
Richard, is it recording?
And it's recording.
So our climate has gone through a tremendous amount of change in the past, and we're going to see a great deal more of it too. As we ride the CTC bus through the present and into the future, we're going to see ups and downs climate-wise, ending with a whole lot of up probably. 15,000 years ago, Chebeague Island lay under roughly 1,000 feet of ice. Here's a rendition of the appearance of Chebeague at that time, with cousins over there on the left. A little soul Chebeaguer standing there who has just missed the ferry. But just consider that concept, that here we are sitting in this room, and not that many years ago, there was 1,000 feet or more of ice above this spot. I just find that sort of thing mind-boggling, and that the world and the climate can have changed so much in so little time. When the ice finally melted, the land had been depressed so much that the actual land that we are resting on here was several hundred feet below sea level. And so the seas rushed in to cover the land, and rushed in to cover as much of Maine as you see in that illustration there. So Chebeague was entirely underwater at that point. There's an idea of what it might have looked like. There's Chebeague at the very bottom with Long Island and Little Chebeague under roughly 300 or 400 feet of water. And that persisted for about 1,000 years, quite a substantial time. And then the waters receded, or what really happened is the land rebounded, and then we ended up with Chebeague looking like this, momentarily after the seas had departed and gone away. It's miraculous to consider that in just 10,000 years or less, it turned into something as beautiful as what we see now. So the change is just staggering. Still plenty of signs of the glacier with us. The striations on the rocks are quite visible in places like Deer Point. And in our front yard, these are the gift of the glacier, these wonderful rounded pieces of rock that we all appreciate so much on this island and elsewhere in New England. After all those millennia of change and warming and so on, it's sort of ironic that the first European settlers arrived here in something called the Little Ice Age, just they were right in the midst of it when they came to New England and arrived in Maine. Here's a graph of what the global temperatures looked like at that time, and before, you see, from the year 0 AD up through the present time. And you can see the dip there in the line as we go through this period from about 1500 to 1800, as we go through what's called the Little Ice Age. if you look at the scale on the left, you see it's not that huge a difference. It's a difference of a few tenths of degrees Celsius, but the impact was certainly enormous on the people in North America and Europe. And in fact, the Little Ice Age was more a Little Ice Age in places like the places I just named than some of the rest of the world. The same is true of the medieval warm period. If you look at that, the red area, you see it doesn't really look any warmer than the rest of it. So, but that did have a big effect on things like the Greenland settlements, but globally, not so much. Europeans' first winters in Maine were quite a shock. Champlain, who spent the first winter in 1604 on the in an island on the St. Croix River, has the statement you can see here. I guess if that's visible enough, I won't bother to read it to you. But I love the way he starts off sort of a little diffidently and not really speaking out very strongly. And then finally, in the final sentence, he says, sort of in desperation, there are 6 months of winter in that country. And the spokesperson for the Virginia Company in Phippsburg in 1607, according to Lincoln Payne, who has written a fabulous book called The Sea and Civilization, the company abandoned the settlement for fear that all other winters would prove like the first. And then fake news began to appear because, after all, a lot of the colonists who moved here, some of them at least, expected to be entrepreneurs and be involved in purchasing land and making money on the deal. So they needed people to come from Europe and join them. And so you get some quite outlandish raves about the weather conditions here. John Smith, of all people, said, I would rather live here than anywhere. And this fellow in Quebec, a French explorer, the weather is so congenial that the French roll in the snow as they do in France upon the grass of our meadows. Wonderful stuff. There was a great deal of very persuasive language that went on trying to draw more people. It's not really surprising that the English were surprised at how cold it was, because they knew they were going south. The coast of Maine lies 10 degrees of latitude south of England. If you go 10 degrees south of England, it takes you down to very southernmost France or northern Spain, which are anything but subarctic. And in fact, if we think about going 1,000 miles south from Chebeague, or 10 degrees, that gets you down to about South Carolina. So those are big increases in temperature that one sees like that. So why was it that they were stuck with temperatures that seemed so much colder than what the latitude suggested? Well, there were two things that really explained it. One is that both England and North America live in the zone of prevailing westerlies. So our weather basically comes from west to east for the most part. And for us in Maine, that means it's coming out of the middle of the continent, where temperature variations and weather conditions are far more variable than they are in the ocean. Well, not the weather conditions are variable, but temperatures certainly vary a great deal more. England, on the other hand, has its winds coming most of the time out of the west, so it has the protection of the stability of the North Atlantic. And the other thing is the jet stream, which the prevailing westerlies help to nudge along, is this warm current that goes all the way across to the British Isles and even up to the north end of Norway. So that was helping to keep things warmer in the British Isles than they really deserved to have. Now, I want to compare London and Portland a little bit more. And by Portland, I often mean Chebeague. And I get away with that, I think, because I've taken a look at the temperature differences between my little weather station on Chebeague and the conditions at the National Weather Service office in Portland. And here's an example of one of these comparisons. These are the daily mean temperatures for the month of August, just 2 months ago. In Portland, plotted on the vertical, and Chebeague plotted horizontally. So each point represents one, actually this was for the whole year of 2021. So each point represents one particular day, like this little point that I'm pointing to. Had a temperature of, if I take it down here, about 45 degrees for Chebeague, and going sideways, it was about 41 degrees for Portland. So each of these points represents the intersection of two temperatures, ours and Portland's. And you see how beautifully they fall on the line with just a very small amount of variation. There are a few days that are a little farther off, but not very much. So when we talk about Chebeague temperatures, we can look at Portland temperatures for guidance. There are conditions like high temperatures and low temperatures that cause more variation, which we'll talk about later, but that's a pretty safe bet. So using that idea, here we are looking at monthly temperatures in London, England, and Portland, Maine, or Chebeague Island, Maine. And if we look at the graph on the left, what we're seeing is the mean temperatures for each month. So we have January, February, March going across the bottom, London in red, Chebeague in blue, and you can see there's a difference on the average in January and February of roughly 15 degrees between those two places. That's an average day in and day out. That's quite a difference for an Englishman to absorb. In the middle of the summer, notice it's the other way around. London is a tad cooler than Portland by about 7 degrees, I guess, something like that. For the extreme temperatures in the lower right here, there's even more of a disparity. The coldest it's ever been in London is 3 above 0 Fahrenheit, whereas Portland has hit 39 below 0. So there's a difference of 43 degrees. And notice the gap here all the way along between the reds and the blues, indicating the degree of degrees difference there is between these two different places. Well, they had barely arrived, the Europeans, before the worst hurricane in at least one of the 2 worst hurricanes in the last 400 years occurred, the Great Colonial Hurricane of 1635. And this was a hurricane that must have had enormous effect on Maine and in particular on Chebeague. A few of the data points on this. It occurred, as it says, about 15 years before George Cleave conveyed land to Walter Murray. So at least these 2 guys apparently were living on Chebeague at that time, and who knows how much before. So this was something that they must have seen the after effects of. It must have looked like pickup sticks there, the trees that must have been demolished. Winds to at least 130 the lowest landfall air pressure ever seen north of the Carolinas. And that's an indicator of how severe the weather system, how intense the weather system was. Enormous tide surge in Buzzards Bay and all those trees down. Further, recently, some people at University of Maine studied the seafloor off of Honeywell Beach over by Popham, and discovered these striations that you can see off on the right, which are folds and beds in the seafloor. They dated these, and it took them directly back to the early 1600s, to the storm of 1635, basically. And so their hypothesis is that that enormous storm is what actually caused these grooves and ripples that you see here, that are still there almost 400 years later. A technical question, Richard. How do I get rid of the people on the side here?
Oh, it's not being broadcast.
Because I'm missing a little bit of my cues. Sorry about this.
I don't know.
Well, I can move around it.
No. Okay.
Okay,
Sorry
let's
about
not, that's okay.
Okay,
Let's not
yeah.
confuse it any further. So the Great Hurricane of 1635. Oh no. Okay, that did it. The year 1818 was known as the year without a summer in New England. And the Portland Observatory's observer was alive and active at that time. Actually, in 1818, he didn't write much of anything down. He had started somewhat before that, but he had sort of lost interest, perhaps. But the weather was so remarkable at that time that he picked up his pen and started writing again. And so there's a page that copied from the Maine Historical Museum. What a wonderful treasure trove of information they have on the weather observations in Portland at that time. Anyway, the translation by me on the left shows you what was going on. In June, you see, temperatures in the 30s and the 40s, a snow squall of 15 minutes. The mercury at that time was 35.5 degrees. They used fractional degrees rather than decimal, which I thought was kind of interesting. So there it is, that everyone talks about the winter, the summer without a winter, and it affected right across New England. And here's the evidence right here. Surely on Chebeague it was snowing on that particular day. In 1844, the great steamship Britannia was frozen into the ice in Boston, and it took weeks for them to free it. They had 120 men chopping a channel to allow them to escape. That didn't work, and finally they brought teams of horses to drag ice saws through the channel and managed to open it up. It's interesting, all these people out on the ice, just looks like dozens and dozens of them, fearless about falling in or something. Not something you would see one of these days. Charles Andrew Granell lived on Cape Elizabeth and also on Chebeague. And he kept a journal, which in which he reported the wicked cold of 1857, the coldest weather that has been seen for many years. And David Ludlam, who has written extensively on American winters, said that the month stood preeminent, he likes that expression, in the period of early records as the coldest single calendar month. And he goes on to say that the 23rd of January was also standing preeminent as the single coldest day in New England history, 52 degrees below zero in Bath, and similar temperatures in New Hampshire and Vermont. 1875, I think New Englanders are fascinated with cold, snow, ice, and storminess, and they tend to spend most of their writing time writing about those things. So we have a great deal of documentation of this sort of thing. And then when the weather is sort of balmy and so on, not so much actually recorded. Here's Grinnell's report of the extreme cold month of January and how deep the snow is. Now it's 2 feet of snow on the level on Chebeague, presumably. We have weather bureau maps that go back that far these days. Here's the one for, I think this was mid-January, January 10th of 1875, the same month. I think it's interesting because, for one thing, there is no weather west of the Great Plains. I think telegraphs hadn't been developed, or at least the network hadn't been developed far enough. Also, the time, it says, was, I can't quite read it at the top, but it basically says we are using Washington time, not local time. There were no time zones at that point. So they said, everybody take your observation when it's 1 o'clock in the morning in Washington. I don't know how they knew when it was that, but that's what they used. And you see, on this day, there's an enormous high pressure cell, a cold one that came out of the northwest. And the other feature is a low pressure center just east of Maine. And you see all those wonderful red lines. Those are isobars of pressure. Actually, we can go to the next chart. That's a blow up of it, showing conditions there. The tightness of those lines indicates the strength of the wind. So the wind was just howling that day. This was at 1 p.m. The temperature in Portland was 13 degrees under bright sun. So it was, and this was typical of weather of that month of 1875. We lived in Wiscasset for a while, and one day we walked through the old custom house, and on one wall on the second floor, there was this writing that somebody had put a frame around. Someone had just written on the wall with pen, and the message I've typed up so you can read it there. So this fellow had walked across the Sheepscot River in Wiscasset to Edgecombe, which never happens these days. It was just, Sheepscot never freezes in Wiscasset. These are wonderful proxy examples of just how very cold it was during and now we're down to the tail end of the Ice Age. And before we leave all these wonderful old records that I was exploring, I have to show you this one, because this is October of 1822 in Portland, precisely 200 years ago. And if you look down to the 10th, right there, you can see that at 8 p.m., which is this column, third column over, the temperature was 61 degrees. Right now, when I left the house, it was, I think, 50. So it looks like it's, in the last 200 years, it's gone down about 11 degrees at this particular moment. That's why you have to be careful about extrapolating or interpolating data. Anyway, I thought it was so much fun that the data are not complete. You can't find all the records, but this one happened to be there for this particular week, month. So there we have it. Okay, moving forward in time, we reached the 20th and 21st centuries. That's when the world started recording things in color, and people perhaps began to enjoy the weather more than they did before, with more leisure time and more disposable income. I don't know. There were certainly wonderful days. And Donna might be able to identify some of those people. But, there were several memorable winters during the first half of the 20th century. The first one was the winter of 1917 and 18, which was terribly cold, and the fishing boats in Portland Harbor and probably on Chebeague as well were all frozen in place, and they could not fish for week after week. So it was devastating to the fishing community. The next one was in the year, the winter of 1933 and 4, which is pictured here, with these 5 Chebeaguers traveled across the ice in a truck to Portland in order to retrieve the Sunday newspaper, and then returned again. I guess the trickiest part, it sounded like, was getting the truck up onto the pier when they got to Portland, but somehow they managed to achieve that. And then they drove back in just, I think they said, an hour and a half or an hour or something, quite a short amount of time. But that sort of thing it happened, and that's how cold it was. But even back then, that was a fairly rare event. This happens to be a weather map on successive days of the gigantic high pressure cold cell that moved through. 2 days before those gentlemen took their truck ride, high pressure just south of Hudson Bay. The little red dot is us. And you can see the high moved very little in a day. It went from central Ontario down to the Great Lakes. And the isobars, just amazing circulation of air. So this was intensely cold dome, huge dome of cold air, with the wind madly circulating clockwise around it. This weather system reaching from Baffin Bay to Texas. Winter of 42 and 43 was interesting because it had a number of days below the normal low temperature for Portland. The red line is Portland's normal low, and you can see all these dots through the winter below the line were days colder than normal. But the extraordinary one is what happened in early February, when the temperature dove to that 39 degrees below 0 point that I mentioned earlier, and 2 or 3 other days with the same reading. Actually, the next to coldest one probably happened the evening that this other guy happened the next morning. So that's probably the same kind of event, but still several others extremely cold. That's an interesting thing about low temperatures. They can go crazy low without very little holding them back. The air gets denser and denser, and it sinks lower and lower. The temperatures keep falling. Whereas to set a high temperature record, it's much more difficult because the air is buoyant, it rises, other air rushes in. So to set a high temperature record, certainly to set a high temperature record by 10 or 15 degrees is extremely unlikely. This is, I think the label on this picture is Ross. So perhaps that would help some of you identify just where that is. On the east end, okay. In 71, another very cold winter, and these 5 fellows walked from Chebeague to cousins. And I think that's the last time that anyone was able to escape Chebeague without using a boat or an airplane or something. One reason we hear so many stories about New England storms and so on is that the storm tracks across North America have a certain tendency to aim right for Chebeague Island, it seems. There are about 5 of them, 4 of them that actually just do cross right there, and a couple of others that are pretty darn close. So no matter which road they take, they seem to end up in New England. They're all heading toward the Great Icelandic Low Pressure Center. But they like to take that path just like airplanes heading for Europe as well. The paths also sort of suggest the wind flow of the jet stream, which after all steers these storms in the first place. So the jet goes west to east, of course, and it tends to dip down and then rise up again to the northeast, all as a reflection of the temperatures in North America. Did I miss a slide? No, not quite. As the storm approaches, we typically see altostratus clouds, which is what is pictured here. This moon or sun get kind of fuzzy, and the sky is pretty nondescript. What happens next depends almost completely on which particular path the low pressure center takes. If it travels to our west, we're going to get winds from the southeast circulating around this thing, you see, bringing warm air from the ocean and moisture from the ocean. So we end up getting the sequence of snow to rain and so on, and then back again. Whereas if it passes to our east, then we're in a northeasterly to northwesterly flow. So that makes all the difference. And often the difference in track can only be, maybe only just a few miles. Very difficult to forecast. Here's a good example of what happens when the weather system passes to our west and it's wintertime. Very likely, very often, the snow, it'll start with snow, turn to freezing rain. And this is a nice example of that. Another one was the famous ice storm of 1998, which is pictured on a certain meteorology textbook. And that also is from a picture from Maine. This is the vessel, the Mascot, which was washed up in one northeasterly storm, I guess. And Tom and Rachel Damon at Chandler's Cove, after what looks to be a terrific amount of erosion that took place in, I think it was 93. This is the weather system that went by just 3 years ago, over Native Peoples Day. You can see this is also down at Deer Point, and you can see the trees all, well, they're angling over from the northeast, which is the direction the wind was blowing there. Tremendously strong northeast storm. They don't have to be snowstorms. If there's not too much freezing rain and snow packed on the ice, the skating can be a wonderful activity, obviously, but so often it gets mired in sleet and freezing rain. This was a photo sent to me by Deb Bowman via Jen Valeska. There's some snow. And these, I've stolen these photos from the wonderful display at the museum. I don't recall, I think these are, who are these folks down here, these kids?
I took a picture of the sculpture, and I'm glad that I had to miss it because no one would believe how big it was.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. That is the,
And Rachel at the time was probably as tall as, almost as tall as she is now.
wow. As spring comes, you get the freshets as the snow melts. This was the almost very great flood in 1936 in Portland. Fellow rowing down one of the streets there. And then there's mud season. So Lisa Tucker offered this photograph of her grandparents. Chebeague's weather is protected, especially from the mild weather season weather systems by its geographical setting. We're tucked into Casco Bay. We have islands that protect us out in front. The mountains also protect us from storms to the back, although the protection by the mountains can be a mixed blessing. Still, we're in a favored spot compared to a place like Cape Elizabeth, say, or Cape Cod. As the temperatures rise in the spring, we have this very odd situation where the land is warmer than the water, and as a result, the winds that come off the land from the north and the northeast to Chebeague are warmer than the winds that come out of the south. So it's a fascinating reversal of what you'd normally expect. And here's a good example of that back on May 1st this year, with inland temperatures in the 50s and 60s, and offshore they're in the low to mid 40s. On this particular day, this is what the trace looked like at the weather station at my house, going through the night, and then warming up during the day, warming up to 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. And that was our high temperature at 11 o'clock, because at that point, the wind shifted from north to southeast or south, and the temperature dropped 5 degrees, and that was it for going swimming or whatever. That sort of took the wind out of the temperature's sails, to mix a metaphor. We know that the average temperature on Chebeague was just about the same as Portland's. They differ only by 0.2 of a degree overall for average temperature. But the high temperatures in Portland are significantly higher than they are in Chebeague. And that's indicated by the fact that all these dots are below the equals line for high temperatures. Whereas for low temperatures, they all flip to the other side. So it's a very clear example of how this varies. This is just one particular month, but I think that it is typical. The sea breeze helps with that too. And so here's the standard sea breeze diagram with air flowing across Chebeague. They don't always have Chebeague in there, but we do here. Rising in the warm air on the land, forming little cumulus clouds, and then coming back around again. Here's an example of that taken from David O'Donnell's boat and taken from our front yard. It's interesting that the clouds form and they're over the land, but not overhead. If you look straight up, those cumulus clouds are always way up to our north, almost always. They're not nearly as common on Chebeague as they are just a few miles north. And here's another example of how that works with the sea breeze. with our temperature rising till about 2 in the afternoon, then plunging, the dew point shoots up as the wind comes around from north to southeast. And then a couple of hours later, it switches back again, and the temperature goes back to what it would have been otherwise. You can almost connect those two lines there. Just fascinating in my mind. Sometimes they turn into full-fledged thunderstorms out there on the mainland. In the winter, and on the winter, in the nighttime, winds switch around since the land is now cooler than the ocean, and we get the opposite sort of flow. I'm going to speed up here. Just another example of their on land activity. And here's a shower building over Cousins. Sometimes it reaches us. And this is a beautiful example of one taken, a photo taken just 2 weeks ago by Sam Burkett. Here we have massive clouds in western New England, drying out as they come downhill to the shore. And it shows so nicely how clouds dissipate as they approach Chebeague, for example. Another example here is how a line of thunderstorms has this gap in it, which seems to be aiming right for Chebeague, and we see the rain go north and south of us, but not over us. I have a theory that it's Lake Winnipesaukee fault. When the wind comes across the lake, it sucks the convection out of it, so the storms stop developing. Same thing is true with Sebago, and also Lake Ossipee, right up in there. Whether that is actually what happens, I don't know, but it sure seems like it. Signs that we know things are changing. We've seen those in photos already, so I don't need to dwell on this. This is about as bad as it gets in the winter these days, as far as ice in the, between us and Cousins goes. We do have significant erosion, such as here on the Hook. Bill McKenzie took a magnificent photo of the sky the other night, and that's a sort of mixed blessing. It's beautiful to see the sunset like that, but the sunsets are enhanced by pollution in the air, by jet contrails and so on, in ways that they weren't when I was a kid. You never see a sunset like that. And a lot of adults, super adults like me, have the same opinion. We have plenty of hard data to show how things have warmed up, such as the length of the growing season here, increasing by 15 days or more. Land and temperature and ocean temperatures rising. Sea ice decreasing. Jet stream doing funny patterns, wiggling around because it doesn't have the same cold Arctic air and it has more heat in it altogether. So we end up with weather systems getting stuck, basically. I'd like to take just a 1 minute break. I need to sit down. Excuse me.
I'm not the half-time show, just making sure it's okay.
We'll give it another whirl. Sorry about the timeout. Do I need to, I approve this, do I? Oh. Zoom US would like to control this computer. Do I say yes or no?
New one. Oh, why that just popped up. You just put it aside. Deny, open. I'm gonna deny it. Uh-oh.
Well, you know what I'm gonna do is zip to the last.
There, I got rid of that for you. You can just power through there.
Okay. I think Mary's about to come up with a hook anyway, so I'm gonna,
No, not at all.
I'm gonna scoot along to, maybe I am. You didn't want to see all of this anyway. But I would like to finish with the following, and that is that we need meteorologists, I like to think, to tell us the hard facts about the weather. Actually, to me, 30 miles an hour is different than 5, right? Artists are better than weather instruments at finding deeper feelings and emotions. So I'd like to conclude with Chebeague artists, some of its character. First is a quilt. It's another quilt, as you can see if you look closely. Clouds and blue skies and different patterns. I can't tell from this picture, but the edging is full of lightning bolts. It's just the most beautiful quilt I ever saw, and I'm so grateful for it. Lisa Tucker, this remarkable photograph from cousins of Chebeague back and she says it was on a warm December afternoon in 2014. And just love the color of that. Kevin Wentworth, of course, is our astronomer royal, and the images that he gets of the skies through the purest air, it's truly phenomenal. The photos he takes there, so good. The final one is a weaving that my wife Esther made of, I think it's sunset. She's not quite sure what it is, but it sure looks like sunset to me. Anyway, I'm stopping there, and thank you all so much for listening. Mary needs to make an announcement.
Are you
Or she'll
up for
take
sitting
questions.
here in a chair for questions?
Sure, absolutely. Oh, geez.
Well,
Maybe I couldn't have. Yeah, sure.
Bill, I have a clarification and a question. But clarification, or not, more information. That picture of my kids at Chandler's Cove, where there was the big discrepancy in the Eagle storm, and it's the stream that comes down through from like South Road down through there, and it cut, and within 5 days, they would never know that had been there. We just happened to be down there, and they happened to take that picture. We couldn't believe it. We went back to show somebody, and it healed. It was unbelievable. And how that happened. So my other question is, why don't we have thunder showers like we used to? Because I've done a lot of research. I can't tell you how many houses on Chebeague were hit by lightning. And when I was a kid, my mother was, I think, thunder shower challenged is a good way to put it. She was dramatic and screeching, and lightning was, hitting trees around where we were at the shore. And we just haven't, not that I want to have another thunder, those kind, but it seems as if it's been quite a while before we've had those kinds of thunder showers.
Well, I think that certainly the 3 years we've been here have been pretty thunder shower free. And part of that's because I think many of those months have been very dry ones to begin with. And it may be the coincidence of that wind channel trajectory coming across Chebeague and so on. If there's a truth to that. So I think part of it is just coincidence. I don't know otherwise why that would be the case. On the other hand, I think it was that storm that Sam had to photograph from. That was a blasty storm. That scared the heck out of me. That was not as any thunderclap I've ever heard. Another thing I think is that when I think back over the winters, for example, I think how snowy it was all the time. Well, it really wasn't. I was a kid in the 50s outside of Boston, and we didn't get that much snow, but I can remember the snowiest days. So I think we sort of accumulate the most exciting ones and hold on to those. But, so I can't think of a good meteorological reason for that.
Well, just the number of houses that we get by rain,
Yeah,
that I found two things about.
yeah.
And,
That's fascinating. Mary, do you want
I have a question from the web.
okay.
Oh, from the web, from Toby and Stacy Webb, asking about, asking if, why there's not as much fog still, especially on the west end. There doesn't seem to be as much fog these days. Do you have an explanation?
Oh, it must be global warming. Well, there might be something to that. I mean, a little more motion in the atmosphere. The atmosphere is a little more energetic because it's warmer, and so it would keep things stirred up a little bit, and you're not getting that radiation or cooling densely down on the surface, and also just mixing the air better so it's not picking up the moisture and holding on to it right on the ocean surface. Beyond that, start saying things again like random variations in wind flow from one time to another. But I know that doesn't really explain things over a longer period of time. I can't think of any good reason why we should have less fog or fewer thunderstorms than we did, when we were young. Yes, Lila.
Bill, we are extraordinarily fortunate to have you living on Chebeague and doing all this measurement. And then sharing with us not only the measurements you've taken, but measurement across the centuries. And I was especially struck by this because I have heard tales from my father and others who would describe these wonderful storms where they would climb through, snowdrifts through into their bedroom window. And I'd like to believe it, but I thought it was a bunch of malarkey. Well, not so. You've shown us that not only In my father's lifetime, that happened, but it was pretty terrible when the Pilgrims arrived.
Certainly
Thank
was.
you very much.
Thank you. Yes,
I'm curious to why the summer of 1818 really was the winter of 1818. What is the scientific reason for that freakish summer of 1818?
I don't know. I think it was freakish. It was just so out of the ordinary. I mean, we get outliers statistically in all kinds of different areas. And that was one that just, besides being somewhat colder normal through that period of years, it happened to hit the coldest of the cold in that particular time. So, I mean, meteorologically, I guess I would say what was happening was there was low pressure probably over Newfoundland with a strong northwesterly flow coming down from Quebec and right down into New England. So that's the only way that it really happened. Just why that set up in that fashion, I have no idea. We can, that's so true of so many questions in meteorology. You can often come back with sort of a one step back answer, but then if someone persists in saying, well, why that and why that, you run out of explanations very quickly. Yes, yes.
Bill, you spent several years on Cape Breton Island.
Yes.
How would you compare the weather there to the weather on Chebeague?
Well, it's very similar in many ways. It's stormier there. All those storms that are on in the storm tracks that we see are sort of gaining speed as they head toward Cape Breton and the Maritimes. So it is windier, it's wetter, very dramatic. It's colder, and so we have the glory of seeing sea ice come in every winter. In fact, it's funny you ask this right now because tomorrow morning we're hoping to take the 8 o'clock ferry to Cape Breton, and in the process of well, once we're there, we're actually selling the place, which breaks our hearts, but not too much because we have Chebeague to come back to. So nobody needs to live on 2 islands, and we're choosing this one. Anything else? I'll be glad to take questions afterwards too. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you for coming this evening, and I want to remind you that our next lecture is Monday, November 14th, and our speaker will be Dwayne Toma. And Dwayne is a language keeper, a teacher of Passamaquoddy language and culture. And he's the youngest fluent speaker of Passamaquoddy. And he has presented at the Kennedy Center and is currently working with the Library of Congress. So we hope to see you on Zoom because starting in November, we will be Zoom only through March. And then we'll pick up again with hybrid. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. Thank you all on Zoom for tuning in.
Hi, Mary. Hey, Mary.
What was the question?
I'll ask you in a second.